Welcome back to the Morning Blend Extra. As you can see, I'm not alone here at the desk anymore. We're joined by Nate Bribey, an investment advisor representative with Klaas Financial. Nate, thank you so much for coming on to the show.
Thank you. Good morning.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's starting things off here. You know, we were talking about those tax brackets right before we went to break. So one of the first things that people kind of want to know about here are those tax brackets. So can you kind of confirm the status of those for this year?
Yes, yeah. So this all starts with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that was introduced in 2017. Now that act introduced some newer lower brackets, the 12%, the 22%, and 24%, and so on. Those brackets are actually set to expire the end of this year. Now comes the One Big Beautiful Bill Act that was just recently passed that actually permanently extended those lower tax brackets. Now this is a big deal because otherwise those brackets were set to increase about 2 to 4%.
Gotcha.
Depending on this bracket.
All right, yeah, and obviously a lot of moving parts there kind of with the Big Beautiful Bill and everything, but we'll kind of see if we can break into that here as we go on throughout the rest of our conversation. But another big topic of discussion has been the SALT cap. Now, that being said, I'm sort of curious what if too many people really know what SALT cap is, state and local taxes, but could you kind of talk a little bit about what that is and then kind of what's changing there?
Sure, exactly, yeah. So it's a good point to clarify. So SALT cap means state and local taxes, like you said. So mainly for us in Illinois, that would be state income taxes and then property taxes, which would be a bad word around here. So normally, you would, in 2024, you have to itemize your taxes to get this deduction, okay? And that was capped at $10,000.
Yes.
To get this bill passed, they actually had to, appease some moderate Republicans to get this passed to increase it to $40,000. So that is increased to $40,000 for 2025 through 2029. Okay,
Gotcha.
Now, like all these have a phase-out range, meaning if your income's too high, that cap can actually come down. Now, it is fairly high for single and married family joint couples. It's $500,000 of AGI, so fairly sizable income there to still get that $40,000, which is a good thing.
And you mentioned it was $10,000 beforehand?
It was.
Holy cow! Yeah, that is quite an increase there.
Yep.
And then what kind of about deductions for our older Americans here? Are there sort of any new provisions for them?
There are, and maybe not the one that most were hoping to have. So one of the campaign promises of the current administration was no tax on Social Security. Unfortunately, that did not get included in this bill, so that was important to understand. What did get included was an additional senior tax deduction of for those 65 plus of up to $6,000 per individual. Okay, so now this is on top of a standard deduction already of $31,500 and an already included $3,200 deduction. So we're gonna add up three numbers here. You ready, Jake?
Yes,
okay,
yes,
so
I'm ready.
$31,500.
$31,500.
Standard deduction for a married family joint couple in 2025. $3,200 was the normal senior tax deduction plus potentially $12,000. That should be $46,700 starting in 2025, once again expanding through 2029. So those deductions are available without itemizing your taxes, your deductions. So that is a difference for the senior tax deduction versus like a state and local tax deduction. Okay, so a little bit of clarification there, and once again, good through 2025 through 2029, subject to some phase-out ranges again.
Yeah, and then, of course, obviously we're kind of talking about this big, beautiful bill here. Another thing that I know was a kind of a big point that was pushed here in this bill was, tax on tips and overtime. So kind of what are the changes that's really going on with that, and sort of how are those things going to be taxed moving forward?
Sure, yep, and these were implemented. So those were obviously on the campaign trail as well. So how it lands now is $25,000 of tips are deductible for individuals, okay? Once again, subject to phase-out ranges, but obviously a great benefit for those in service industries. So now it is unique, like you have to be in a trade or position that is accustomed to receiving tips, okay? So I can't tip you and you deduct that. Like, well, that's your
right. We're talking like servers or like an Uber driver or something along those lines.
Like that, okay? And then the other one would be overtime wages. Once again, a position accustomed to receiving overtime hours, okay? And that is $12,500 per individual. That is the deduction from income.
Gotcha. All right, very interesting there. And then finally, kind of wrapping things up here, a piece of legislation that has also kind of garnered a lot of attention is the Social Security Fairness Act. We kind of talked a little bit earlier about this, but can you kind of briefly explain kind of what this entails and how it's going to really impact us here?
Yep, so this was back in January, okay, that this act was implemented. And it kind of came out of nowhere, truly. We were kind of following it, and then all of a sudden it got through and passed, okay, under the previous administration. And how this was now, there are two provisions that were removed, which were namely the government pension offset and the windfall elimination provision. And what those did for residents of Illinois, maybe that are covered by TRS, the teacher's pension, or SERS, a state employee, those individuals historically did not pay into Social Security, okay? So they are deemed to be covered by a non-covered pension. And say that individual worked, at a covered position, like at a grocery store when they were younger or something, had some wages that did pay into Social Security, they would get their Social Security statement and say, Nate, you're eligible for $1,500 a month.
Right.
But in fact, those two provisions actually applied and it reduced that benefit. So those provisions got removed, and now, long story short, what you see on your statement is what you could be eligible for in your Social Security statement. Now, this applies to not only your own earnings record, but also your spouse's record.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Interesting.
Or a survivor benefit if unfortunately you've lost a spouse.
Yeah.
Okay. So very important. If you think you may be eligible, call Social Security and reference what's called the Fairness Act. They know exactly what that is. Obviously, that's their program, and they'll be able to determine if you're eligible for a benefit, an increased benefit, which is pretty cool. Now, one last thing on this. It is actually retroactive back to January of 24.
Interesting.
So we've had clients actually get lump sum checks of $15,000 to $25,000 just for making a phone call. And it's always a fun call, and I get like, that's probably worth your call, Daddy, wasn't
not
it?
bad.
So it's kind of a fun thing to do on a Thursday, I guess. But
absolutely. And obviously, you guys are available to help community members through this. So, of course, you guys can head to Klaas Financial out there at 4704 Perry Ridge Lane over there in Loves Park. Yes. And, of course, you can give them a call at 815-877-8440, or you can visit their website on screen at klaasfinancial.com. Nate, thank you so much again for coming on to the show. I know that there's a lot of confusing questions kind of pertaining to what's the future in the tax kind of world. So,
absolutely.
All right, thank you so much again, Nate.